Before Secretariat, racing had no debate. Citation was the standard. In 1948, he raced 20 times and won 19. His single defeat was a fixed farce. Built by Calumet and Bull Lear and trained to be unstoppable, Citation could sprint, stay, and carry crushing weights. But if you took this iron horse and dropped him into the Secretariat era, would he still demolish the field? To answer how good Citation truly was, you need to see just how far his legend was engineered to go. In 1948, Citation's campaign was relentless. He started the year at Gulfstream, rolled through Florida, and kept going, never ducking a challenge, never skipping a test. The final ledger reads 20 starts and 19 wins. That single loss, a blip surrounded by a wall of victories, remains shrouded in controversy and whispers of backstretch politics. But the numbers are unambiguous: 15 straight wins in a single season, 17 of them in stakes company, all while facing the best his era could offer. The purses piled up. By the end of the year, Citation had earned $709,470, more than any horse in history to that point. He won at every major distance, from 6 furlongs to 2 miles, and on every track that dared to host him. The record books did not need asterisks. Citation's 1948 is the kind of season that makes statisticians squint and rivals quietly shake their heads. For a quarter century, these numbers stood as the yardstick. Every new champion was measured against the iron standard set by Citation. Bull Lear stood at the center of Calumet Farm's breeding shed, a stallion whose name would come to define an era. He wasn't just Citation's sire, he was the backbone of American racing throughout the 1940s, a 5-time leading sire whose offspring dominated the classics. Calumet Farm itself operated like a dynasty, racking up more Kentucky Derby wins than any other stable. Their Devil's red silks as familiar on the front page of the daily racing form as the Yankees' pinstripes on a World Series scoreboard. The farm's approach was industrial, but their product was anything but ordinary. Ben Jones and his son Jimmy formed a training partnership that was both old school and unrelenting. Ben, the patriarch, believed in building horses for the long haul, a doctrine of hard work, heavy gallops, and frequent racing. Jimmy, with a sharper eye for detail, polished each prospect until they gleamed under pressure. Together, they forged a stable of horses that didn't just win, they endured. Citation was their masterpiece, bred for stamina and schooled for war. Bull Lear's blood gave him a deep engine, while the Calumet system toughened him for the grind. This wasn't the era of fragile champions. At Calumet, the expectation was simple: show up, run hard, and keep coming back. That philosophy would carry Citation through a campaign that still defies belief. Comparing racehorses across generations is never as simple as reading a stopwatch. In Citation's era, every official time was caught by hand, timers with stopwatches and eyes fixed on the finish. Even the best could be off by 0.2 of a second, sometimes as much as 2/5 of a second. That is a full length or more at the wire, all lost or gained in a blink. When Secretariat stormed into the record books decades later, electronic beams had replaced human reflexes. The margin for error shrank to a sliver, and every stride was measured with machine precision. But timing was not the only variable. The dirt itself changed. In the 1940s, tracks like Churchill Downs and Belmont were deeper, looser, and far less uniform than today. Maintenance crews relied on harrows and water trucks, but the surface could shift from week to week, even race to race. Modern tracks are engineered for speed, shallower, firmer, and consistent from rail to crown. Studies estimate that deeper old-style dirt could slow a horse by 2 or more seconds per mile compared to today's surface. That is the difference between a world record and an ordinary afternoon. When analysts adjust Citation's times, they factor in these hidden variables: hand clock lag, surface drag, and even weather on race day. The numbers on the page are just the starting point. True comparison demands context, a blend of technology, track science, and the ever-present human element. Only then does the stopwatch begin to tell the real story. Havre de Grace, Maryland, spring of 1947. The starting gate snapped open for a 4.5 furlong sprint, and a bay colt in Calumet's devil-red silks broke sharply from the rail. His name was Citation, a name the crowd barely knew. By the first call, he was already moving with a fluid, almost mechanical stride, ears pinned, legs churning in perfect symmetry. When he hit the stretch, there was no hesitation, no green inexperience, just a steady, relentless drive. He finished a length in front, but it was the clock that told the real story. The timer's hand stopped faster than anyone expected. Citation had not only won his debut, he had broken the track record for a juvenile at Havre de Grace. The old-timers in the grandstand looked at their programs, then at each other. Horses were not supposed to do this on their first try, not against seasoned company, not at a track known for sorting out the pretenders from the real thing. The whispers started before Citation had even cooled out. Calumet had another monster on their hands. For the first time, the racing world glimpsed what would become a season of records and a legend in the making. Citation's arrival was not just a win, it was a warning shot to every stable in the country. Citation's first real test did not come from a rival stable or a seasoned champion. It came from his own barn, and her name was Bewitch. She was a filly with a future, fast, valuable, and every bit as hyped as Citation himself. When they met at Washington Park, the crowd expected a duel, but what unfolded left the grandstand buzzing for weeks. Citation broke well and settled in stride, and then something strange happened. Instead of the usual relentless drive, he seemed to fight his rider, resisting every check and hold. Bewitch edged ahead, and Citation lunged at her, ears pinned, as if refusing to accept the script. At the wire, Bewitch held on by the slimmest of margins, a nose, maybe less. Whispers started before the horses even reached the unsaddling area. Word spread that the instructions were clear. Citation was to be held back, preserving Bewitch's value as a future broodmare. Jockeys talk, grooms gossip, and soon the talk was not just about a loss, but about a race decided by the barn, not the track. Citation's record now had a blemish, but it was not the kind that made people doubt him. If anything, it made the colt's legend grow. Here was a horse so dominant, the only way to beat him was to ask him not to win. Retribution came swiftly in the Pimlico Futurity. Citation lined up against Bewitch, the filly who had edged him out under questionable tactics. This time, there were no restraints. He broke sharply, settled into his relentless rhythm, and left Bewitch and every other rival far behind. The official margin was 5 lengths, but it looked wider. The press called it a display of pure authority, the kind that erases all doubts and whispers. Trainers and turf writers began to talk about Citation as something more than a promising colt. He was a force, a machine that could not be gamed or held. But the real test was not a grudge match with a stablemate. Calumet Farm entered Citation, still just a 2-year-old, against Armed, the reigning horse of the year and a battle-tested champion. No one expected the juvenile to threaten a horse like Armed. The race turned into a showdown. Citation, giving away years of muscle and experience, hooked up with Armed in the stretch. They thundered down the lane, stride for stride. At the wire, Armed's nose was in front, but Citation had matched him step for step, forcing a photo finish. The headlines the next morning did not just praise Armed's victory, they marveled that a baby had nearly beaten the heavyweight king. In that moment, Citation's legend jumped from barn gossip to national newsprint. He was not just a prodigy, he was a measuring stick for greatness, and the sport was starting to realize it. Coaltown burst onto the Florida racing scene in early 1948 like a shot of adrenaline through the Calumet barn. He was not just another promising colt, he was a comet, setting a new track record in his debut at Hialeah Park. The clockers double-checked their watches. Reporters started scribbling headlines. In a year when Citation was already turning heads, Coal Town's raw speed gave the press a new obsession. Suddenly, the conversation in every backstretch and press box revolved around who was the real monster in Calumet's arsenal. Coal Town's fractions were electric, his stride smooth and predatory. Turf writers labelled him the Derby favourite before spring had even settled in. It was a rare moment when Citation, the machine, found himself in the shadow of a stablemate. The rivalry was not just a barn story, it was a national headline. With both colts pointing toward Churchill Downs, every workout and entry drew scrutiny. The sense of an internal arms race at Calumet was palpable. Coal Town's presence ensured that Citation's path would never be routine, setting up a collision course that would test both horses and everyone around them. A.L. Snyder was more than just a name on a program. He was the young hand who understood Citation's quirks, the calm voice in the colt's ear as the stakes climbed higher. In March 1948, with the Derby just weeks away, Snyder joined a fishing trip off Sandy Key into the Florida Everglades. The weather was calm at sunset when Snyder, along with trainer Toby Trotter and businessman Don Fraser, set out in a small skiff for one last cast. The boat drifted into the dark, watched from the anchored yacht nearby. Then the storm rolled in, fast, violent, and blinding. When dawn broke, there was no sign of the skiff or its passengers. The Coast Guard swept over 1,000 square miles by air and sea, searching for any trace. Days later, the skiff was found empty near Rabbit Key, 10 miles from where they had set out. The boat was undamaged, but stripped of oars and gear, as if the men had simply vanished into the water. For Calumet Farm, the loss was personal. Snyder had piloted Citation through 9 victories, forging a partnership that was supposed to peak in the Triple Crown. Now, with the Derby looming, the team faced not just a tactical gap, but the raw shock of losing one of their own. The moment forced everyone to confront the fragility behind the steel routine of racing. It was a reminder that even the most promising journey can be upended in a single, silent night. The call went out to Eddie Arcaro, a name that still echoed from the grandstands of every major track. He wasn't the obvious choice. Arcaro had been easing into semi-retired life, his days of chasing every mount supposedly behind him. But Ben Jones needed more than just a replacement. He needed someone who could shoulder the pressure of a Triple Crown run. Arcaro agreed to come down for a morning workout, slipping quietly into the Calumet barn before sunrise. Citation was waiting, already saddled and restless. Arcaro swung up, took the reins, and pointed the colt toward the track. What happened next would become stable legend. The workout wasn't fast by stopwatch standards, but it was the way Citation moved, smooth, powerful, unbothered by the weight of expectation that caught Arcaro's attention. When he pulled up, he didn't hesitate. "I'll ride him," Arcaro said, loud enough for Ben Jones and every hand in earshot. "He's the best horse I've ever sat on." With Arcaro in the irons, the mood around Calumet shifted. The shock of Snyder's loss remained, but now there was a sense of purpose, a belief that the right man was back in the saddle. The partnership between Arcaro and Citation would become one of the most formidable in racing history, setting the stage for a Triple Crown campaign that would test both horse and rider at every turn. The Derby trial at Churchill Downs drew a line in the sand between 2 colts from the same barn, Citation and Coal Town. 4 horses broke from the gate, but all eyes tracked the Calumet Silks. Coal Town, all muscle and fire, shot to the front, clicking off the opening quarter mile in 24 2/5 seconds. By the half mile, he had stretched his lead, clocking 49 flat. The press box buzzed. This was the speed everyone had been talking about, the kind that had broken records in Florida and turned Coal Town into the Derby favorite overnight. But Citation, with Eddie Arcaro now in the saddle, never flinched. He stalked the pace, ears flicking, legs unhurried. At the three-quarter pole, the split read 1 minute 13 3/5 seconds. Coletown still led, but the gap was shrinking. Arcaro did not move his hands. He gave just a soft chirp, a subtle nudge. Citation responded with the kind of power that does not show in photographs, only in the way a horse's stride lengthens and the ground seems to tilt in his favor. By the mile marker, Coletown's margin had vanished. Citation swept past without a fight, gliding over the fast track as if the contest had been a formality. He crossed the wire 3 lengths clear, finishing the mile and an eighth in 1 minute 52 seconds flat. Vulcan's Forge, the next best, was 8 lengths behind them. Coletown, after his early fireworks, was spent. The chart caller's notes were almost clinical. The chart called it Citation won easily. In that moment, the question that had hung over the barn all spring was answered. Coletown's speed was real, but Citation's stamina and composure were something else entirely. The Derby trial was not just a prep, it was a declaration. The march toward Louisville had begun, and Citation was leading it. Louisville, May 1st, 1948. The Kentucky Derby drew a crowd of more than 130,000, packed shoulder to shoulder beneath a slate sky, the track heavy from days of rain. 15 horses lined up. But the real contest played out between 2 sets of Calumet silks, Coletown the speedster, and Citation the relentless machine. When the gates flew open, Coletown shot to the front, his stride devouring the sloppy ground. For a moment, it looked like the track conditions played right into his hooves, but Citation, with Eddie Arcaro perched motionless, tracked him with a predator's patience. The fractions flashed by, 23 2/5 seconds for the quarter, 47 1/5 seconds for the half. Coletown still led, but Citation never gave chase. He just waited, unhurried, as the field strung out behind them. At the top of the stretch, Arcaro shifted his weight, glanced over his shoulder at the crowd, and finally let Citation go. The response was instant. Citation surged past Coletown as if the Derby were a private exhibition, not the most famous race in America. The margin grew with every stride. By the wire, Citation was 3.5 lengths clear, Arcaro sitting chilly, barely moving his hands. The rest of the field faded into the fog of kicked-up mud, chasing a shadow that never tired. Film of that Derby tells the story in slow motion. Citation's ears flicking back for instructions, Arcaro's face calm, the pair gliding past rivals who looked spent long before the finish. The official chart called it won easily. For the record books, it was a 3.5 length victory. For those who watched, it was something more, a display of absolute control, a champion making the hardest race look like a morning gallop. The Derby was not a test, it was a coronation, and Citation wore the crown without breaking stride. The Preakness Stakes arrived 2 weeks after the Derby, and Citation faced only 3 others in the gate. The field was thin, not from lack of eligible horses, but from a collective sense of futility among rival trainers. Vulcan's Forge gave chase early, but Citation, under Eddie Arcaro's light hands, rated kindly just off the pace. At the far turn, Arcaro let out a notch. Citation responded with his signature, almost mechanical acceleration, rolling past the leaders as if they were standing still. He opened daylight in the stretch, finishing 5.5 lengths ahead, ears pricked, barely winded. The official chart called it a paid workout. Vulcan's Forge, the best of the rest, trailed in second, with Better Self and Reconstellation strung out behind. The time was sharp, the effort minimal. Most Triple Crown contenders would head straight to New York for the Belmont and a well-earned rest, not Citation. 10 days after the Preakness, Calumet shipped him to Garden State Park for the Jersey Stakes, a move that confounded modern logic but suited the Calumet philosophy. The field here wasn't deep either, and the outcome was never in doubt. Citation stalked the early pace, then cruised past on Jet and the others, pulling away with such ease that Arcaro never lifted a finger. The winning margin was 11 lengths. The track was fast, the clockers impressed, but to Citation it might as well have been another morning gallop. He emerged from the race without a mark or a hint of fatigue, ready for the Belmont while others would have been resting sore legs. In a span of 3 weeks, he had swept the Preakness, crushed the Jersey Stakes, and made the extraordinary look routine. There was no sign of wear, no chink in the armor, just the relentless, unhurried march of a horse who seemed immune to exhaustion. Belmont Park, June 12, 1948. The crowd pressed against the rail, eyes fixed on the starting gate. Citation loaded calmly, 11 for 11 that year, and carrying the weight of history. When the gates flew open, disaster nearly struck. Citation stumbled hard, his nose almost scraping the dirt. For a split second, it looked as though the Triple Crown dream might end before the first turn. But before panic could ripple through the grandstand, he had already found his feet. In 3 strides, he was balanced, legs stretching out, rhythm returning. Eddie Arcaro never panicked. He gathered Citation's head, settled him, and let the Colt's engine take over. The field tried to capitalize, but Citation surged forward, as if the stumble had never happened. By the clubhouse turn, he was already in control, gliding past rivals who had seen their only opening vanish. The fractions ticked by, 24 4/5 seconds for the quarter, and 50 seconds for the half. Citation relaxed on the lead, Arcaro sitting chilly, hands quiet. The rest of the field chased shadows down the backstretch, but Citation's stride only lengthened. At the top of the stretch, Arcaro gave him a gentle shake of the reins. Citation responded with his signature effortless drive, opening daylight with every stride. He crossed the wire 8 lengths in front, tying the Belmont Stakes record of 2 minutes, 28 1/5 seconds set by Count Fleet 5 years earlier. The official chart called it won easily, but those who watched knew how close it came to unraveling at the start. With the Triple Crown complete, and his record now a perfect 11 for 11 in 1948, Citation had turned a moment of crisis into another line in the record books. The machine had proven unbreakable, even when fate tried to trip him up. Ben Jones had no interest in letting Citation coast on reputation. Through the summer and into the fall of 1948, the schedule never let up. In October, the Pimlico Special was announced, a race so daunting that not a single challenger entered. Citation walked the track alone, ears pricked, collecting the trophy in a scene that spoke louder than any finish line photo. It was not a day off, it was a statement. No one wanted a piece of him. By December, the campaign stretched west to California. At Tanforan, Citation lined up for the handicap against a field of older horses, carrying top weight as usual. He did not just win, he crushed the 1 1/4 miles world record, stopping the clock faster than any horse before him at that distance. The numbers told the story: 20 starts, 19 wins, and season earnings of $709,470. There was no pause, no soft spot in the schedule. Under Ben Jones's philosophy, a champion proved himself not by resting on laurels, but by showing up, race after race, until even the calendar ran out of questions. After a year that rewrote the record books, Citation's body began to show the toll of relentless racing. By winter's end in 1948, veterinarians diagnosed ocellates, bone growths and inflammation around the fetlock joints, a common but crippling injury in horses pushed to their limits. Swelling and heat in his ankles left him stiff, robbing him of the smooth, piston-like stride that had carried him through 20 starts. In the era before advanced imaging or modern anti-inflammatories, rest was the only prescription. Citation spent all of 1949 away from the track, his legs bandaged and iced, his future uncertain. For a horse built and trained to run, The forced layoff was a kind of exile. Fans and turf writers speculated whether the champion would ever return, or if Calumet would retire him undefeated at the top. The barn fell quiet. The Iron Horse, once the sport's living metronome, spent his days walking the shed row and his nights standing in straw, ankles packed in clay, while the rest of racing moved on without him. Warren Wright watched from his office at Calumet as Citation limped through the long months of recovery. But the goal never changed. By 1950, the $1 million milestone had become an obsession. Citation, battered ankles and all, was sent back to the track, not for glory, but for the number. What waited was not a hero's parade, but a gauntlet. Nor, the Irish import, had arrived in California with a stride built for speed and a featherweight assignment from the handicappers. Citation lined up against Nor 4 times that year, each time giving away 6, 8, sometimes 12 pounds. The old champion carried 130, 132, even 134 pounds, weights that would make modern trainers blanch. Nor, lighter and fresher, edged Citation at the wire again and again. In every defeat, Citation broke or equaled the track record. At Golden Gate, running on legs packed with ice and tape, he blazed a mile in 1 minute 33 3/5 seconds, a world record while still giving away pounds. The paradox was plain: slower to the eye, but faster on the clock. Citation was running better than ever, only to be beaten by the scale. The $1 million chase was no fairy tale. It was a test of bone, will, and arithmetic, with the finish line moving further away each time Nor's name appeared on the entry sheet. Hollywood Park, July 14, 1951. Citation, now 6 years old and running on ankles that had seen too many miles, loaded into the gate for the Hollywood Gold Cup. The crowd knew what was at stake. One last win would make him the first horse to earn $1 million. The field included his old rival Bewitch, but the story was already written in the numbers. Carrying 130 pounds, Citation stalked the leaders, then ground them down in the stretch. He crossed the wire first. His career earnings were $1,085,760, and the racing world paused to take measure. The verdict on greatness often leans on speed, but the full measure of a champion is broader. Secretariat's 2 minutes, 24 seconds in the 1973 Belmont remains the stopwatch standard, but Citation's record stands on a different axis. He was the only American champion to win at 6 furlongs and 2 miles in the same season, thriving on any surface, under any weight. Analysts today use what they call the versatility metric, a blend of distance range, ability. By that score, Citation stands alone. His 1948 campaign, with 20 starts and 19 wins across every kind of race, remains the template for what a racehorse could be when toughness mattered as much as time. In the end, he was not just the first millionaire. He was the last of the Iron Horses. In today's era of carefully managed champions, horses rarely race more than a handful of times a year, let alone carry 130 pounds to victory. Citation's brand of relentless durability no longer exists in the sport. As modern racing debates greatness through speed and spectacle, his legacy warns us what is lost when toughness becomes nostalgia. Sometimes the standard isn't just shattered, it is quietly retired. What do you think? Does racing need another Citation, or is that era gone for good?